Sitting beside the road, watching the wagon mount the hill toward her, Lena thinks, I have come from Alabama, a fur piece, all the way from Alabama a-walking, a fur piece. Thinking, although I have not been quite a month on the road, I am already in Mississippi, further from home than I have ever been before. I am now further from Doan's Mill than I have been since I was 12 years old. She had never even been to Doan's Mill until after her father and mother died, though 6 or 8 times a year she went to town on Saturday, in the wagon, in a mail-order dress and her bare feet flat in the wagon bed, and her shoes wrapped in a piece of paper beside her on the seat. She would put on the shoes just before the wagon reached town. After she got to be a big girl, she would ask her father to stop the wagon at the edge of town, and she would get down and walk. She would not tell her father why she wanted to walk in instead of riding. He thought that it was because of the smooth streets, the sidewalk. But it was because she believed that people who saw her and whom she passed on foot would believe that she lived in the town too. When she was 12 years old, her father and mother died in the same summer, in a log house of 3 rooms and a hall without screens, in a room lighted by a bug-swirled kerosene lamp, the naked floor worn smooth as old silver by the naked feet. She was the youngest living child. Her mother died first. She said, "Take care of Paul." Lena did so. Then one day her father said, "You go to Doan's Mill with McKinley. You get ready to go. Be ready when he comes." Then he died. McKinley, the brother, arrived in a wagon. They buried the father in a grove behind a country church one afternoon with a pine headstone. The next morning she departed forever, though it is possible that she did not know this at the time, in the wagon with McKinley for Doan's Mill. The wagon was borrowed, and the brother had promised to return it by nightfall. The brother worked in the mill. All the men in the village worked in the mill or for it. It was cutting pine. It had been there 7 years, and in 7 years more it would destroy all the timber within its reach. Then some of the machinery and most of the men who ran it and existed because of and for it would be loaded onto freight cars and moved away. But some of the machinery would be left, since new pieces could always be bought on the installment plan. Gaunt, staring, motionless wheels, rising from mounds of red brick rubble and ragged weeds, with a quality profoundly astonishing, and gutted boilers lifting their rusting and unsmoking stacks with an air of stubborn, baffled, and bemused upon the stump-marked scene of profound and peaceful desolation. Unplowed, untilled, gutting slowly into red and choked ravines beneath the long, quiet rains of autumn and the galloping fury of vernal equinoxes. Then the hamlet, which at its best day had borne no name listed on post office department annals, would now not even be remembered by the hookworm-ridden heirs at large, who pulled the buildings down and burned them in cook stoves and winter grates. There were perhaps 5 families there when Lena arrived. There was a track and a station, and once a day a mixed train fled shrieking through it. The train could be stopped with a red flag, but by ordinary it appeared out of the devastated hills with apparition-like suddenness, and wailing like a banshee, athwart and past that little less than village, like a forgotten bead on a broken string. The brother was 20 years her senior. She hardly remembered him at all when she came to live with him. He lived in a 4-room and unpainted house with his labor and child-ridden wife. For almost half of every year, the sister-in-law was either lying in or recovering. During this time, Lena did all the housework and took care of the other children. Later she told herself, "I reckon that's why I got one so quick myself." She slept in a lean-to room at the back of the house. It had a window which she learned to open and close again in the dark without making a sound, even though they also slept in the lean-to room, at first her oldest nephew, then the 2 oldest, then the 3. She had lived there 8 years before she opened the window for the last time. She had not opened it a dozen times hardly before she discovered that she should never have opened it at all. She said to herself, "That's just my luck." The sister-in-law told the brother. Then he remarked her changing shape, which he should have noticed some time before. He was a hard man, softness and gentleness and youth. He was just 40, and almost everything else except a kind of stubborn and despairing fortitude and the bleak heritage of his blood pride had been sweated out of him. He called her whore. He accused the right man. Young bachelors or sawdust Casanovas anyway were even fewer in number than families. But she would not admit it. Though the man had departed 6 months ago, she just repeated stubbornly, "He's going to send for me. He said he would send for me." Unshakable, sheep-like. Having drawn upon that reserve of patience and steadfast fidelity upon which the Lucas Birches depend and trust, even though they do not intend to be present when the need for it arises. 2 weeks later, she climbed again through the window. It was a little difficult this time. If it had been this hard to do before, I reckon I would not be doing it now, she thought. She could have departed by the door by daylight. Nobody would have stopped her. Perhaps she knew that. But she chose to go by night, and through the window. She carried a palm leaf fan and a small bundle tied neatly in a bandana handkerchief. It contained, among other things, 35 cents in nickels and dimes. Her shoes were a pair of his own which her brother had given to her. They were but slightly worn, since in the summer neither of them wore shoes at all. When she felt the dust of the road beneath her feet, she removed the shoes and carried them in her hand. She had been doing that now for almost 4 weeks. Behind her, the 4 weeks, the evocation of fall is a peaceful corridor paved with unflagging and tranquil faith, and people with kind and nameless faces and voices. Lucas Birch? I don't know. I don't know of anybody by that name around here. This road, it goes to Pocahontas. He might be there. It's possible. There's a wagon that's going a piece of the way. It will take you that far. Back rolling now behind her a long, monotonous succession of peaceful and undeviating changes from day to dark and dark to day again, through which she advanced in identical and anonymous and deliberate wagons as though through a succession of creek-wheeled and limp-eared avatars, like something moving forever and without progress across an urn. The wagon mounts the hill toward her. She passed it about a mile back down the road. It was standing beside the road, the mules asleep in the traces, their heads pointed in the direction in which she walked. She saw it, and she saw the 2 men squatting beside a barn beyond the fence. She looked at the wagon and the men once, a single glance, all embracing, swift, innocent, and profound. She did not stop. Very likely the men beyond the fence had not seen her even to look at the wagon or at them. Neither did she look back. She went on out of sight, walking slowly, the shoes unlaced about her ankles, until she reached the top of the hill a mile beyond. Then she sat down on the ditch bank, with her feet in the shallow ditch, and removed the shoes. After a while she began to hear the wagon again. She heard it for some time. Then it came into sight mounting the hill. The sharp and brittle crack and clatter of its weathered and ungreased wood and metal is slow and terrific. A series of dry, sluggish reports carrying for half a mile across the hot, still, pine-windy silence of the August afternoon. Though the mules plod in a steady and unflagging hypnosis, the vehicle does not seem to progress. It seems to hang suspended in the middle distance forever and forever. So infinitesimal is its progress, like a shabby bead upon the mild red string of road. So much is this so that in the watching of it the eye loses it as sight and sense drowsily merge and blend, like the road itself, with all the peaceful and monotonous changes between darkness and day, like already measured thread being rewound onto a spool, so that at last, as though out of some trivial and unimportant region beyond even distance, the sound of it seems to come slow and terrific and without meaning, as though it were a ghost traveling a half mile ahead of its own shape. That far within my hearing before my seeing, Lena thinks. She thinks of herself as already moving, riding again, thinking. Then it would be as if I were riding for half a mile before I even got into the wagon, before the wagon even got to where I was waiting, and that when the wagon is empty of me again, it will go on for half a mile with me still in it. She waits, not even watching the wagon now, while thinking goes idle and swift and smooth, filled with nameless, kind faces and voices. Lucas Birch, you say you tried in Pocahontas? This road, it goes to Springvale. You wait here. There will be a wagon passing soon that will take you as far as it goes. Think it. And if he is going all the way to Jefferson, I will be riding within the hearing of Lucas Birch before his seeing. He will hear the wagon, but he won't know. So there will be one within his hearing before his seeing. And then he will see me, and he will be excited. and so there would be two within his seeing before his remembering. He changed completely. They planned to be married. He knew now that he had seen all the while that desperate calculation in her eyes. Perhaps they were right in putting love into books, he thought quietly. Perhaps it could not live anywhere else. The desperation was still in them. But now that there were definite plans, a day set, it was quieter, mostly calculation. They talked now of his ordination, of how he could get Jefferson as his call. "We'd better go to work right away," she said. He told her that he had been working for that since he was 4 years old. Perhaps he was being humorous, whimsical. She brushed it aside with that passionate and least humorlessness, almost inattention, talking as though to herself of men, names to see, to grumble or to threaten, outlining to him a campaign of abasement and plotting. He listened. Even the faint smile, whimsical, quizzical, perhaps of despair, did not leave his face. He said, "Yes, yes, I see, I understand," as she talked. It was as if he was saying, "Yes, I see now. That's how they do such, gain such. That's the rule, I see now." At first, when the demagoguery, the abasement, the small lying had its reverberation in other small lies and ultimate threats in the form of requests and suggestions among the hierarchy of the church, and he received the call to Jefferson, he forgot how he had got it for the time. He did not remember until after he was settled in Jefferson, certainly not while the train of the journey's last stage fled toward the consummation of his life across a land similar to that where he had been born. But it looked different, though he knew that the difference lay not outside but inside the car window against which his face was almost pressed, like that of a child, while his wife beside him had now also something of eagerness in her face, besides hunger and desperation. They had been married now not quite 6 months. They had married directly after his graduation. Not once since then had he seen the desperation naked in her face, but neither had he seen the passion again. And again he thought quietly, without much surprise and perhaps without hurt, "I see, that's the way it is, marriage. Yes, I see now." The train rushed on. Leaning to the window, watching the fleeing countryside, he talked in the bright, happy voice of a child. "I could not have come to Jefferson before at almost any time, but I didn't. I could have come at any time. There's a difference, you know, between civilian and military casualness. Military casualness? Oh, it was the casualness of desperation. A handful of men. He was not an officer. I think that was the only point on which father and old Center were ever in accord. That grandfather wore no sword, galloped with no sword waving in front of the rest of them, performing with the grim levity of schoolboys a prank so foolhardy that the troops who had opposed them for 4 years did not believe that even they could have attempted it. Riding for 100 miles through a country where every grove and hamlet had its Yankee bivouac, and into a garrison town. I know the very street that they rode into town upon and then out again. I have never seen it, but I know exactly how it will look. I know exactly how the house that we will someday own and live in upon the street will look. It won't be at first, for a while. We will have to live in the parsonage at first. But soon as we can, where we can look out the window and see the street, maybe even the hoof marks or their shapes in the air, because the same air will be there even if the dust, the mud is gone. Hungry, gaunt, yelling, setting fire to the store depot of a whole carefully planned campaign, and riding out again. No looting at all, no stopping for even shoes, tobacco. I tell you, they were not men after spoils and glory. They were boys riding the sheer, tremendous tidal wave of desperate living. Boys, because this is beautiful. Listen, try to see it. Here's that fine shape of eternal youth and virginal desire which makes heroes, that makes the doings of heroes border so close upon the unbelievable that it is no wonder that their doings must emerge now and then like gun flashes in the smoke, and that their very physical passing becomes rumor with 1,000 faces before breath is out of them, lest paradoxical truth outrage itself. Now this is what Cynthia told me, and I believe, I know, it's too fine to doubt. It's too fine, too simple ever to have been invented by white thinking. A Negro might have invented it, and if Cynthia did, I still believe, because even fact cannot stand with it. I don't know whether Grandfather's squadron were lost or not. I don't think so. I think they did it deliberately, as boys who had set fire to an enemy's barn without taking so much as a single shingle or a door hasp might pause in flight to steal a few apples from a neighbor, a friend. Mind you, they were hungry. They had been hungry for 3 years. Perhaps they were used to that. Anyway, they had just set fire to tons of food and clothing and tobacco and liquors, taking nothing, though they had not been issued any order against looting. And they turned now, with all that for backdrop. The consternation, the conflagration, the sky itself must have been on fire. You can see it, hear it, the shouts, the shots, the shouting of triumph and terror, the drumming hooves, the trees uprearing against that red glare as though fixed to in terror, the sharp gables of houses like the jagged edge of the exploding and ultimate earth. Now it is a close place. You can hear, feel, in the darkness, horses pulled up short, plunging, clashes of arms, whispers over loud, hard breathing. The voices still triumphant. Behind them the rest of the troops galloping past toward the rallying bugles. That you must hear, feel, then you see. You see before the crash and the abrupt red glare the horses with wide eyes and nostrils and tossing heads, sweat-stained, the gleam of metal, the white gaunt faces of living scarecrows who have not eaten all they wanted at one time since they could remember. Perhaps some of them had already dismounted. Perhaps one or two had already entered the hen house. All this you see before the crash of the shotgun comes, then blackness again. It was just that one shot, and of course he would be right in the way of it, Cynthia said. Stealing chickens. A man growed with a married son, gone to a war where his business was killing Yankees, killed in somebody else's hen house with a handful of feathers, stealing chickens. His voice was high, childlike, exalted. Already his wife was clutching his arm. Shh, shh, people are looking at you. But he did not seem to hear her at all. His thin, sick face, his eyes seemed to exude a kind of glow. That was it. They didn't know who fired the shot. They never did know. They didn't try to find out. It may have been a woman, likely enough the wife of a Confederate soldier. I like to think so. It's fine so. Any soldier can be killed by the enemy in the heat of battle, by a weapon approved by the arbiters and rule makers of warfare, or by a woman in a bedroom, but not with a shotgun, a fowling piece, and a hen house. And so is it any wonder that this world is peopled principally by the dead? Surely when God looks about at their successors, he cannot be loath to share his own with us. Hush, shh, they are looking at us. Then the train was slowing into the town. The dingy purlieus slid vanishing past the window. He still looked out, a thin, vaguely untidy man with still upon him something yet of the undimmed glow of his calling, his vocation. Quietly surrounding and enclosing and guarding his urgent heart, thinking quietly how surely heaven must have something of the color and shape of whatever village or hill or cottage, of which the believer says, "This is my own." The train stopped, the slow eyes still interrupted without looking, then the descent among faces grave, decorous and judicial, the voices, the murmurs, the broken phrases kindly yet still reserved of judgment, not yet giving, and let us say it, prejudicial. I admitted that, he thinks. I believe that I accepted it, but perhaps that was all I did do. God forgive thee. The earth has almost faded from sight. It is almost night now. His bandaged, distorted head has no depth, no solidity. Immobile, it seems to hang suspended above the twin pale blobs which are his hands. Lying upon the ledge of the open window, he leans forward. Already he can feel the two instants about to touch, the one which is the sum of his life, which renews itself between each dark and dusk, and the suspended instant out of which the soon will presently begin. When he was younger, when his net was still too fine for waiting, at this moment he would sometimes trick himself and believe that he had heard them before he knew it was time. Perhaps that is all I ever did, have ever done, he thinks, thinking of the faces of old men naturally dubious of his youth and jealous of the church which they were putting into his hands almost as a father surrenders a bride. The faces of old men lined by that sheer accumulation of frustration and doubt which is so often the other side of the picture, of hale and respected full years. The side, by the way, which the subject and proprietor of the picture has to look at, cannot escape looking at. They did their part. They played by the rules, he thinks. I was the one who failed, who infringed. Perhaps that is the greatest social sin of all, perhaps mortal sin. Thinking goes quietly, tranquilly, flowing on, falling into shapes quiet, not assertive, not reproachful, not particularly regretful. He sees himself a shadowy figure among shadows, paradoxical, with a kind of false optimism and egoism, believing that he would find it in that part of the church which most blunderers dream recovering among the blind passions and the lifted hands and voices of men, that which he had failed to find in the church's cloistered apotheosis upon earth. It seems to him that he has seen it all the while, that that which is destroying the church is not the outward groping of those within it, nor the inward groping of those without, but the professionals who control it and who have removed the bells from its steeples. He seems to see them, endless, without order, empty, symbolical, bleak, sky-pointed, not with ecstasy or passion, but in adjuration, threat, doom. He seems to see the churches of the world like a rampart, like one of those barricades of the Middle Ages, planted with dead and sharpened stakes against truth, and against that peace in which to sin and be forgiven, which is the life of man. And I accepted that, he thinks. I acquiesced. Nay, I did worse. I served it. I served it by using it to forward my own desire. I came here where faces full of bafflement and hunger and eagerness waited for me, waiting to believe. I did not see them. Where hands were raised for what they believed that I would bring them, I did not see them. I brought with me one trust, perhaps the first trust of man, which I had accepted of my own will before God. I considered that promise and trust of so little worth that I did not know that I had even accepted it. And if that was all I did for her, what could I have expected? What could I have expected save disgrace and despair, and the face of God turned away in very shame? Perhaps in the moment when I revealed to her not only the depth of my hunger, but the fact that never and never would she have any part in that assuaging of it, perhaps at that moment I became her seducer and her murderer, author and instrument of her shame and death. After all, there must be some things for which God cannot be accused by man and held responsible. There must be. Thinking begins to slow now. It slows like a wheel beginning to run in sand, the axle, the vehicle, the power which propels it, not yet aware. He seems to watch himself among faces, always among, enclosed and surrounded by faces, as though he watched himself in his own pulpit, from the rear of the church, or as though he were a fish in a bowl. And more than that, the faces seem to be mirrors in which he watched himself. He knows them all. He can read his doings in them. He seems to see reflected in them a figure antic as a showman, a little while, a charlatan preaching worse than heresy, in utter disregard of that whose very stage he preempted, offering instead of the crucified shape of pity and love, a swaggering and unchastened bravo filled with a shotgun, in a peaceful henhouse, in a temporary hiatus of his own avocation of killing. The wheel of thinking slows. The axle knows it now, but the vehicle itself is still unaware. He sees the faces which surrounded him mirror astonishment, puzzle, then outrage, then fear, as if they looked beyond his wild antics and saw behind him and looking down upon him, in his turn unaware, the final and supreme face itself, cold, terrible, because of its omniscient detachment. He knows that they see more than that they see the trust of which he proved himself unworthy, being used now for his chastisement. It seems to him now that he talks to the face. Perhaps I accepted more than I could perform. But is that criminal? Shall I be punished for that? Shall I be held responsible for that which was beyond my power? And the face, it was not to be accomplished that you accepted her. You took her as a means toward your own selfishness, as an instrument to be called to Jefferson, not for my ends, but for your own. Is that true, he thinks? Could that have been true? He sees himself again as when the shame came. He remembers that which he had sensed before it was born, hiding it from his own thinking. He sees himself offer as a sop fortitude and forbearance and dignity, making it appear that he resigned his pulpit for martyr's reasons, when at the very instant there was within him a leaping and triumphant surge of denial behind a face which had betrayed him, believing itself safe behind the lifted hymn book, when the photographer pressed his bulb. He seems to watch himself, alert, patient, skillful, playing his cards well, making it appear that he was being driven, uncomplaining, into that which he did not even then admit had been his desire since before he entered the seminary. and still casting his sops as though he were flinging rotten fruit before a drove of hogs, the meager income from his father which he had continued to divide with the Memphis institution, allowing himself to be persecuted, to be dragged from his bed at night and carried into the woods and beaten with sticks, he all the while bearing in his own town's sight and hearing without shame, with that patient and voluptuous ego of the martyr, the air, the behavior, the how long, O Lord, until inside his house again and the door locked, he lifted the mask with voluptuous and triumphant glee. Oh, that's done now, that's past now, that's bought and paid for now. But I was young then, he thinks. I too had to do, not what I could, but what I knew. Thinking is running too heavily now. He should know it, sense it. Still, the vehicle is unaware of what it is approaching. And after all, I have paid. I have bought my ghost, even though I did pay for it with my life. And who can forbid me doing that? It is my man's privilege to destroy himself, so long as he does not injure anyone else, so long as he lives to and of himself. He stops suddenly, motionless, unbreathing. There comes upon him a consternation which is about to be actual horror. He is aware of the sand now. With the realization of it, he feels within himself a gathering, as though for some tremendous effort. Progress now is still progress, yet it is now indistinguishable from the recent past, like the already traversed inches of sand, which cling to the turning wheel, reining back with a dry hiss that before this should have warned him. Reveal to my wife my hunger, my ego, instrument of her despair and shame. And without his having thought it at all, a sentence seems to stand full sprung across his skull behind his eyes. I don't want to think this. I must not think this. I dare not think this. As he sits in the window, leaning forward above his motionless hand, sweat begins to pour from him, springing out like blood and pouring. Out of the instant, the sand-clutched wheel of thinking turns on with the slow implacability of a medieval torture instrument. Beneath the wrenched and broken sockets of his spirit, his life. Then, if this is so, if I am the instrument of her despair and death, then I am in turn instrument of someone outside myself. And I know that for 50 years I have not even been clay. I have been a single instant of darkness, in which a horse galloped and a gun crashed. And if I am dead, my dead grandfather on the instant of his death, then my wife, his grandson's wife, the debaucher and murderer of my grandson's wife, since I could neither let my grandson live nor die. The wheel release seems to rush on with a long sighing sound. He sits motionless in its aftermath, in his cooling sweat, while the sweat pours and pours. The wheel whirls on. It is going fast and smooth now, because it is freed now of burden, of vehicle, axle, all. In the lambent suspension of August into which night is about to fully come, it seems to engender and surround itself with a faint glow like a halo. The halo is full of faces. The faces are not shaped with suffering, not shaped with anything, not horror, pain, or even reproach. They are peaceful, as though they have escaped into an apotheosis. His own is among them. In fact, they all look a little alike, composite of all the faces which he has ever seen. But he can distinguish them one from another. His wife's, townspeople, members of that congregation which had denied him, which had met him at the station that day with eagerness and hunger, barren bunches, the woman with the child, and that of the man called Christmas. This face alone is not clear. It is confused more than any other, as though in the now peaceful throes of a more recent and more inextricable compositeness. Then he can see it that it is two faces which seem to strive, but not of themselves striving or desiring it. He knows that, but because of the motion and desire of the wheel itself. In turn to free themselves one from the other, then fade and blend again. But he has seen now the other face, the one that is not Christmas. Why, it's, he thinks, I have seen it recently. Why, it's that boy with that black pistol, automatic they call him, the one who, into the kitchen where, killed, who fired thee. Then it seems to him that some ultimate damned flood within him breaks and rushes away. He seems to watch it, feeling himself losing contact with earth, lighter and lighter, emptying, floating. I am dying, he thinks. I should pray. I should try to pray. But he does not. He does not try. With all air, all heaven, filled with the lost and unheeding crying of all the living who ever lived, wailing still like lost children among the cold and terrible stars. I wanted so little. I asked so little, it would seem. The wheel turns on. It spins now, fading without progress, as though turned by that final flood which had rushed out of him, leaving his body empty and lighter than a forgotten leaf. and even more trivial than flotsam lying spent and still upon the window ledge, which has no solidity beneath his hands, that have no weight, so that it can be now, now. It is as though they had merely waited until he could find something to pant with, to be reaffirmed in triumph and desire with his last left of honor and pride in life. He hears above his heart the thunder increase, myriad and drumming. Like a long sighing of wind in trees, it begins. Then they sweep into sight, borne now upon a cloud of phantom dust. They rush past, forward leaning in the saddles, with brandished arms beneath whipping ribbons from slanted and eager lances. With tumult and soundless yelling, they sweep past like a tide, whose crest is jagged with the wild heads of horses, and the brandished arms of the men like the cradle of the world in explosion. They rush past, are gone. The dust swirls skyward, sucking, fades away into the night which has fully come, yet leaning forward in the window, his bandaged head huge and without depth upon the twin blobs of his hands upon the ledge, it seems to him that he still hears them, the wild bugles and the clashing sabers and the dying thunder of hooves. Summer and fall and snow and wet and sap-ripe spring in their ordered immortal sequence, the deathless and immemorial phases of the mother who had shaped him, if any had, toward the man he almost was. Mother and father both to the old man born of a Negro slave and a Chickasaw chief, who had been his spirit's father, if any had, whom he had revered and hearkened to and loved and lost and grieved. And he would marry some day, and they too would own for that brief while that brief, unsubstanced glory which inherently of itself cannot last, and hence why glory. And they would and might carry even the remembrance of it into the time when flesh no longer talks to flesh, because memory at least does last, but still the wood would be his mistress and his wife. He was not going toward the gum tree. Actually, he was getting farther from it. Time was, and not so long ago either, when he would not have been allowed here without someone with him. And a little later, when he had begun to learn how much he did not know, he would not have dared be here without someone with him. And later still, beginning to ascertain, even if only dimly, the limits of what he did not know, he could have attempted and carried it through with a compass, not because of any increased belief in himself, but because McCaslin and Major Despain and Walton and General Compson too had taught him at last to believe the compass, regardless of what it seemed to state. Now he did not even use the compass, but merely the sun, and that only subconsciously. Yet he could have taken a scale map and plotted at any time to within 100 feet of where he actually was. And sure enough, at almost the exact moment when he expected it, the earth began to rise faintly. He passed one of the 4 concrete markers set down by the lumber company's surveyor to establish the 4 corners of the plot where Major Despain had reserved out of the sale. Then he stood on the crest of the knoll itself, the 4 corner markers all visible now, blanched still even beneath the winter's weathering, lifeless and shockingly alien in that place where dissolution itself was a seething turmoil of ejaculation, tumescence and conception and birth, and death did not even exist. After 2 months of blanketing, of leaves, and the flood waters of 2 springs, there was no trace of the 2 graves anymore at all. But those who would have come this far to find them would not need headstones, but would have found them as Sam Fathers himself had taught him to find such, by bearings on trees, and did, almost the first thrust of the hunting knife, finding, but only to see if it was still there, the round tin box manufactured for axle grease and containing now old Ben's dried, mutilated paw, resting above Lyon's bones. He didn't disturb it. He didn't even look for the other grave where he and McCaslin and Major Despain and Boone had laid Sam's body, along with his hunting horn and his knife and his tobacco pipe, that Sunday morning 2 years ago. He didn't have to. He had stepped over it, perhaps on it, but that was all right. He probably knew I was in the wood this morning long before I got here, he thought. Going on to the tree which had supported one end of the platform where Sam lay when McCaslin and Major Despain found them. The tree, the other axle grease tin nailed to the trunk, but weathered, rusted, alien too, yet healed already into the wilderness concordant generality, raising no tuneless note, and empty, long since empty, the food and tobacco he had put into it that day. As empty of that as it would presently be of this which he drew from his pocket, the twist of tobacco, the new bandana handkerchief, the small paper sack of peppermint candy, which Sam had used to love. That gone too almost before he had turned his back, not vanished, but merely translated into the myriad life, which printed the dark mold of these secret and sunless places with delicate ferret tracks, which, breathing and biting and immobile, watched him from beyond every twig and leaf until he moved, moving again, walking on. He had not stopped, he had only paused, quitting the knoll which was no abode of the dead, because there was no death, not Lon and not Sam, not held fast in earth but free in earth, and not in earth but of earth, myriad yet undiffused of every myriad part, leaf and twig and particle, air and sun and rain and dew and night, acorn, oak and leaf and acorn again, dark and dawn again, in their mutable progression, and being myriad one. And old Ben too, they would give him his paw back even. Certainly they would give him his paw back. Then the long challenge and the long chase, no heart to be driven and outraged, no flesh to be mauled and bled. Even as he froze himself, he seemed to hear Ash's parting admonition. He could even hear the voice as he froze, immobile, one foot just taking his weight, the toe of the other just lifted behind him, not breathing, feeling again, and as always, the sharp, shocking inrush from when Isaac McCasman long since was not. And so it was fear all right, but not fright, as he looked down at it. It had not coiled yet, and the buzzer had not sounded either, only one thick, rapid contraction, one loop cast sideways as though merely for purchase, from which the raised head might dart slightly backward. Not in fright either, not in threat quite yet. More than 6 feet of it, the head raised higher than his knee, and less than his knee's length away. The once bright markings of its youth dull now to a monotone, concordant too with the wilderness it crawled and lurked. The old one, the ancient and accursed about the earth, fatal and solitary. And he could smell it now, the thin, sick smell of rotting cucumbers and something else which had no name, evocative of all knowledge and an old weariness and a pariahhood and death. At last it moved. Not the head. The elevation of the head did not change as it began to glide away from him, moving erect, yet off the perpendicular, as if the head and that elevated third were complete and all, an entity walking on two feet and free of all laws of mass and balance, and should have been, because even now he could not quite believe that all that shift and flow of shadow behind that walking head could have been one snake, going and then gone. He put the other foot down at last, and didn't know it. Standing with one hand raised as Sam had stood that afternoon 6 years ago when Sam led him into the wilderness and showed him, and he ceased to be a child, speaking the old tongue which Sam had spoken that day without premeditation either. "Chief," he said, "grandfather." He couldn't tell when he first began to hear the sound, because when he became aware of it, it seemed to him that he had already been hearing it for several seconds. A sound as though someone were hammering a gun barrel against a piece of railroad iron. A sound loud and heavy and not rapid, yet with something frenzied about it, as the hammerer were not only a strong man and an earnest one, but a little hysterical too. Yet it couldn't be on the log line, because although the track lay in that direction, it was at least 2 miles from him, and this sound was not 300 yards away. But even as he thought that, he realized where the sound must be coming from. Whoever the man was and whatever he was doing, he was somewhere near the edge of the clearing, where the gum tree was, and where he was to meet Boone. So far he had been hunting as he advanced, moving slowly and quietly and watching the ground and the trees both. Now he went on, his gun unloaded and the barrel slanted up and back to facilitate its passage through brown undergrowth. Approaching, as it grew louder and louder, that steady, savage, somehow queerly hysterical beating of metal on metal, emerging from the woods into the old clearing with the solitary gum tree directly before him. At first glance, the trees seemed to be alive with frantic squirrels. There appeared to be 40 or 50 of them, leaping and darting from branch to branch, until the whole tree had become one green maelstrom of mad leaves. While from time to time, singly or in 2s and 3s, squirrels would dart down the trunk, then whir without stopping and rush back up, as though sucked violently back by the vacuum of their fellow's frenzied vortex. Then he saw Boone sitting his back against the trunk, his head bent, hammering furiously at something on his lap. What he hammered with was the gun barrel of his dismembered gun. What he hammered at was the breech of it. The rest of the gun lay scattered about him in a half-dozen pieces, while he bent over the piece on his lap. His scarlet and streaming walnut face hammering the disjointed barrel against the gun breech with the frantic abandon of a madman. He didn't even look up to see who it was. Still hammering, he merely shouted back to the boy in the hoarse, strangled voice, "Get out of here! Don't touch them! Don't touch a one of them! They're mine!" He stopped. For a moment he didn't answer. Then he said peacefully, in a peaceful rushing burst, as when a boy's miniature dam in a little brook gives way, "All right, but how? I went to the bow. I even found the log again. I reckon that was all right. Likely he's been watching you. You never saw his foot?" The boy said. "I didn't. I never thought. It's the gun," Sam said. He stood beside the fence, motionless, the old man, son of a Negro slave and a Chickasaw chief, in the battered and faded overalls and the frayed 5-cent straw hat which had been the badge of the Negro slavery and was now the regalia of his freedom. The camp, the clearing, the house, the barn, and its tiny lot with which Major Spade in his turn had scratched punily and evanescently at the wilderness, faded in the dusk, back into the immemorial darkness of the woods. The gun, the boy thought, the gun. "You will have to choose," Sam said. He left the next morning before light, without breakfast, long before Uncle Ash would wake in his quilt on the kitchen floor and start the fire. He had only the compass and a stick for the snakes. He could go almost a mile before he would need to see the compass. He sat on a log, the invisible compass in his hand, while the secret night sounds which had ceased at his movements scurried again and then fell still for good. And the owls ceased and gave over to the waking day birds, and there was light in the gray wet woods, and he could see the compass. He went fast, yet still quietly, becoming steadily better and better as a woodsman without yet having time to realize it. He jumped a doe and a fawn, walked them out of the bed close enough to see them, the crash of undergrowth, the white scut, the fawn scudding along behind her faster than he had known it could have run. He was hunting right, upwind, as Sam had taught him, but that didn't matter now. He had left the gun by his own will and relinquishment. He had accepted not a gambit, not a choice, but a condition, in which not only the bear's heretofore inviolable anonymity, but all the ancient rules and balances of hunter and hunted had been abrogated. He would not even be afraid, not even in the moment when the fear would take him completely, blood, skin, bowels, bones, memory from the long time before it even became his memory, all save that thin, clear, quenchless lucidity which alone differed him from this bear and from all the other bears and bucks he would follow during almost 70 years. To which Sam had said, "Be scared, you can't help that, but don't be afraid. Ain't nothing in the woods going to hurt you if you don't corner it or it don't smell that you are afraid. A bear or a deer has got to be scared of a coward the same as a brave man has got to be." By noon he was far beyond the crossing on the little bow, farther into the new and alien country than he had ever been, traveling now not only by the compass, but by the old, heavy, biscuit-thick silver watch which had been his father's. He had left the camp 9 hours ago. 9 hours from now, dark would already have been an hour old. He stopped for the first time since he had risen from the log, when he could see the compass face at last, and looked about, mopping his sweating face on his sleeve. He had already relinquished of his will because of his need, in humility and peace and without regret, yet apparently that had not been enough. The leaving of the gun was not enough. He stood for a moment, a child, alien and lost in the green and soaring gloom of the marvelous wilderness. Then he relinquished completely to it. It was the watch and the compass. He was still tainted. He removed the link chain of the one and the loop thong of the other from his overalls and hung them on a bush and leaned the stick beside them and entered it. When he realized that he was lost, he did as Sam had coached and drilled him, made a cast across his back track. He had not been going very fast for the last 2 or 3 hours, and he had gone even less fast since he left the compass and watch on the bush. So he went slower still now, since the tree could not be very far. In fact, he found it sooner than he really expected to, and turned and went to it. But there was no bush beneath it, no compass, no watch, so he did next as Sam had coached and drilled him, made his next circle in the opposite direction and much larger, so that the pattern of the two of them would bisect his track somewhere, but crossing no trace nor mark anywhere of his feet or any feet. And now he was going faster, though still not panicked, his heart beating a little more rapidly, but strong and steady enough. And this time it was not even the tree, because there was a down log beside it, which he had never seen before. And beyond the log a little swamp, a seepage of moisture somewhere between earth and water. And he did what Sam had coaxed and drilled him as the next and last, seeing as he sat down on the log the crooked print, the warped indentation in the wet ground, which while he looked at it continued to fill with water until it was level full and the water began to overflow, and the sides of the print began to dissolve away. Even as he looked up, he saw the next one, and moving, the one beyond it, moving, not hurrying, running, but merely keeping pace with them as they appeared before him, as though they were being shaped out of thin air, just one constant pace short of where he would lose them forever and be lost forever himself. Tireless, eager, without doubt or dread, panic a little above the strong, rapid little hum of his heart. Emerging suddenly into a little glade, and the wilderness coalesced. It rushed, soundless and solidified. The tree, the bush, the compass, and the watch glinting where a ray of sunlight touched them. Then he saw the bear. It did not emerge, appear, it was just there, immobile, fixed in the green and windless noon's hot dappling. Not as big as he had dreamed it, but as big as he had expected, bigger, dimensionless against the dappled obscurity, looking at him. Then it moved. It crossed the glade without haste, walking for an instant into the sun's full glare and out of it, and stopped again and looked back at him across one shoulder. Then it was gone. It didn't walk into the woods. It faded, sank back into the wilderness without motion, as he had watched a fish, a huge old bass, sink back into the dark depths of its pool and vanish without even any movement of its fins.